Hello, welcome everyone to the This Is Not Therapy Hour. I am Brandon Tessers, LCPC. I'm a licensed therapist, but this is not therapy for so very, very many reasons. This is a live stream, and it's just a conversation, question and answer, whatever. It's time for me to be here and you to be here and us to be here together and impact each other and all that fun stuff. I should write a song like Mr. Rogers. There's no better way to like transition into something than the way that Mr. Rogers did. Um, Welcome. So this hour, it's what I said. It's just a conversation. Those of you who are here, thank you for being here, and those of you who are in the chat, thank you for being in the chat. If you're watching on Facebook, then your chat name will be your Facebook account. If you're watching on YouTube, it'll be your Google account. And if you're watching on Twitch, it'll be your Twitch account. So keep that in mind because comments show up publicly. And if you're not in the chat, consider getting in the chat. Make yourself an anonymous account if you need to throw something out there, feel comfortable. Because it's a lot more fun for me. I'm just being selfish. It's a lot more fun for me if people are talking with me. And really, it helps me to know what's going to be most useful. If I talk about whatever I want to talk about, which we always pick a topic to start with so that nobody has to like sit here in silence until, sitting in silence, unless it serves a very specific purpose, it's not my default way of working. I can do it when it's a good thing to do. So I have a topic and we'll start talking about things, but we don't have to stay within that or even related to that. We can go wherever, do whatever. I think that covers it. Oh, I run a practice called Effective Artistry. It's a private therapy and executive functioning coaching practice in Illinois. That's our fun logo up there in the corner. And we specialize in neurodiversity and executive functioning and creativity. And of course, with artistry in the name and creativity being one of our specialties, we work with a lot of artists. People come to us for that reason, which I love to do. But I also want to make it clear to people that creativity isn't just about art. Creativity is about making connections independently, right? That two things which have not been handed to you as being connected to one another, you've connected. Art is a specific form of expression, whatever the art is, right? It's using a particular media or particular techniques or whatever. And yes, that involves a lot of creativity, but we are all creative every single day, moment to moment. How am I going to get to work today? Sometimes that's a creative endeavor. Sometimes it's not the same routine as before, even if it is just as simple as, I forgot my coffee at home, so I'm going to swing by Starbucks. You're solving a problem creatively. Anyway, topic today. I don't have a good overarching description for it, but basically, how much is too much? It's a question that I get a lot in many different forms, and it's something that's relevant in my life personally, specifically around being a parent and how much is too much of X for a child. It's something that comes up a lot, so let's talk about it. And again, if you have questions in here or responses or want to guide us. Oh, and I should say I apologize for the cancellation last week without any notice. I was sick. If anybody tuned in, we got it launched like 10 minutes after the hour, and you could barely hear my voice because I had no voice last week, which, second time I've ever canceled it. We've been doing it for a year, and so I felt a little guilty about it, but it would have been too much. So how much is too much? I get this question a lot, or, related questions. Basically, is it a problem if, or how little is too little, or, effectively, it's always coming back to, I am observing or experiencing this particular thing. And even though in and of itself, I haven't seen any problems or experienced any problems, I'm worried that it might lead to problems later. And I want to get a heads up on that so I can make some adjustments before it becomes a problem. And I always give the most unsatisfying answer because the answer always, when someone says, is this a problem? Is it a problem for you? Because we don't know. I don't know if it's a problem that you are on your phone 3 hours a day. Is that too much? Is that a problem? I don't know. Is it a problem for you? What will it make happen later? We don't know. There's a particularly, so cognitive fallacies, right? Cognitive biases and logical fallacies, things that the brain does, well, I shouldn't say it that way. It's not things that the brain actively does. It's mistakes that we make in a predictable or consistent kind of a way that we can then trace back to and try to explain the underlying mechanism behind it. So, for example, survivorship bias is a particular cognitive bias. That means I am looking at my data set and assuming that it contains all attempts at a thing, when often it's really only showing me all the successful attempts, right? So if I were, for example, well, I guess we don't need to go into all that detail. That's fair. Also incredibly frustrating. Yes, it is very frustrating. And of course, really, I say, okay, you're not going to like my answer, but then I'll give you some stuff that's helpful. And then I say, it depends. Is it a problem for you? And then I give what I can give that can help. It is important to me to be clear that I don't know the future. I have no ability to predict the future. I can make predictions, and sometimes the things that I think are going to happen will happen. But even if that's the case, we all do that, by the way. I'm not saying I'm clairvoyant. That's what thinking is. We're guessing about how things will go. But even if everything I think is going to happen happens, my ability to think about everything is very limited. So I'm looking at a very narrow subset of whatever is happening. One way of talking about a concept like this is to look at things like opportunity cost. People will say things like, oh, it's unhealthy to blank. It's unhealthy to eat too much sugar. No, I don't want to go down that path. That's going to take us way off track. It's unhealthy to do heroin. Okay, sure, yes. And the question is, for a given individual who is doing that, what would they otherwise be doing? That's the part. How are we supposed to observe the thing that didn't happen? So we act as though it didn't exist. Yeah, frustrating when your friend swings the question back to you. Yeah, that is one very common way of hiding a lack of knowledge, which is just the most counterproductive thing. And except for in very specific circumstances, it very rarely benefits somebody to act like they know something that they don't actually know. But yes, answering a question with a question is definitely one of those ways. The reason I ask, of course, aside from letting people know that I don't know, how am I supposed to know, is to get them to try to look more closely at it. So the brain wants things to be simple. We have finite resources, and the simpler things are, the more we can handle in those finite resources, including things like what we've automated and therefore we don't need to pay attention to or think about at all. We love that because now we can spend those resources elsewhere. So we want things to be simple, and we only make them more complicated when the simple things fail us. That's how it should be. The problem that sometimes happens is that when someone is trying to treat something simply, act as though something is simple. Like, let's use the example of somebody saying, I'm on my phone 3 hours a day. Is that too much? If we come up with a simple answer, we're going to just say yes or no, basically, right? Like, research says blah, 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 blah. But for that person, it might be right. For that person, it might be wrong. There was a time in my life where I played probably 20 hours of video game a week, if not more, honestly. And it wasn't a problem. If I played that much video games right now, it would be a big problem. I don't have that much free time. So I would be letting some other things go undone, some probably pretty important things go undone if I was going to do that. So, and yes, that's partly because in that particular example, we're talking about an amount of time, which maybe like talking about a proportion of time could be better. But it doesn't matter what metric, any metric you use is limited. It's useful and limited. So I want people to look more closely. Is 3 hours on your phone a problem? Is it a problem for you? And then they got to think. Or if we were doing like actual therapy or one-on-one work, then I would explore that question in more detail with them. What is it that is happening that you don't like, that you think might be attributable to the amount of time you spend on your phone? Or what is it that's not happening that you wish was happening, and you think the reason it's not happening is because you're spending that much time on your phone? Because now we know what we're really looking at. People just generally are way too smart for our own good, which intelligence is about being able to make guesses, run scenarios in our heads. It's about answering the question, what's worth trying? But people lose track of that and generally think that it's about answering the question, what will work or what will happen? That one we can't answer. What's worth trying, we can come up with an answer. But if we say what will work, then we have staked a position. And if it doesn't work, it's a problem. So what I was saying before is we try and treat something simply. And if that doesn't work, great, fine. That's how it works. We get more complicated, except a lot of the time, especially more and more as time goes on, people will react to that by saying, I'm doing it wrong. Instead of treating this as though it's simple, didn't work, now I need to treat it as though it's more complex. It's treating this as though it's simple, didn't work, I must be doing it wrong. I must be bad. Problem for me that I spend hours reading mediocre comics online every evening, but it's probably a mental placeholder because I don't have spell slots to do anything. So the real problem is a lack of spell slots. I like that. I've sometimes used the metaphor of spell slots with people, especially if I'm working with people who are into D&D, because that particular method of magic, which, refresh my memory. This loses me some nerd cred. What is that style of magic called? I have certain spells that I prepare each day, and then when I cast one, I can no longer do it again until the next day. There's a specific word for that style of magic system. Anyway, yes, in economics, what we're talking about is opportunity cost, which means that everything that you do, say you spend $1 to buy a candy bar. Concept of spoons with spell slots works so well. All right, let me finish opportunity cost, and then I want to talk about spoon theory. Yeah, 5e uses it, but there's a specific, it's something like, Batesian magic, but I can't remember what it is called. Anyway, actually, 5th edition, this is just going to be a D&D podcast or a stream today. 5th edition changed a lot of this significantly. It used to be that you had to, when you prepared your spells, especially as a wizard, pick in advance how many iterations of each thing, whereas now you just have a list that you can use and cast spell slots off it. Not what we're here for, although I love D&D. Opportunity cost is the idea that if I spend $1 on a candy bar, the simple way of saying that is I spent $1. I gave up $1, and in exchange I got a candy bar. But $1 is in and of itself worthless, right? The only value that $1 holds is the fact that it can be exchanged for other things. So what is it actually that you're spending when you buy the candy bar is you're giving up the opportunity to use that $1 in another way. The $1 itself doesn't matter. It's what could I have bought with that $1? That's what I'm giving up. I can't do that now because I no longer have that $1. This is important because time, energy, attention, working memory, all these things are finite resources, which means everything we spend, we lose the opportunity to spend that in a different way. And that doesn't mean don't ever spend it, because some of that's not even an option. You don't get to choose not to spend your time. Time just passes. It does mean, though, that if we're going to evaluate whether what we're doing is valuable, we have to evaluate that within the context of what else would those resources have been spent on. Can my character influence your life? Yes. I am playing the original Baldur's Gate game and picking the number of iterations. It's so frustrating and feels excessive, but I'm afraid. 5th edition, I first played 2nd edition, but I'm not a grognard. 2nd edition was terrible. THAC0 and all that stuff. I keep mentally chastising myself for talking so much about D&D on this, but whatever. It's what's in the chat, right? I loved 3rd edition and 3.5. I loved 4th edition, but 5th edition is the best one, I think. There's a reason it's the most popular. Can my character influence your life? Yes, your character can influence your life because fundamentally your D&D character isn't actually that different as an experience for your cognitive experience of it isn't fundamentally different from any other role that you take on. When you take on a new job, you develop an identity in order to navigate that job. You act differently in that scenario than in a different scenario. And yeah, playing a character is that too. In fact, we are, I've said this in the past, but still working on developing a group a D&D narrative therapy group that utilizes character creation and role play within the context of Dungeons and Dragons to help with therapeutic aims. Anyway, so that's opportunity cost. It's if I'm spending something in order to do X, I can't spend that in order to do Y or anything else, anything that's not X. So back to the concept of spoons, because I like spoon theory, I like it a lot, and it's like all useful things, limited, and I want to try and offer expansions to that, So for anyone who doesn't know spoon theory, and actually if someone in the chat knows and could help me, because I can't remember who it is that developed spoon theory. But spoon theory is the concept basically, and I don't know why they use spoons as the metaphor. It started originally talking about people who suffer from chronic pain conditions and chronic fatigue conditions, but has expanded out into all sorts of disabilities and disorders. The idea that you start every day with a certain number of spoons, and then doing something takes spoons from you. And sooner or later you run out of spoons, right? And then you've got to just wait until the next day. It's a way to explain why someone might really want to do something, value doing something, and not do it because they don't have the spoons for it. So it's very similar to a lot of what we talk about in executive functioning and resource management and all that kind of stuff. The two things about spoon theory, and I'm sure that many people within spoon theory have already addressed these. I don't follow everything super closely there. The two things generally still held in spoon theory, or when people talk about it anyway, that are limited, is we don't talk a lot about how to get spoons back. It's just a magical, you get a bunch of spoons at the beginning of the day, or how to evaluate how many spoons something is costing and how much you have remaining. Oh, good. The Spoon Theory by Christine Miserandino. Yeah. The second thing is it's not only people with chronic illness who have finite energy. It's more useful for people with chronic illness to be more aware of their energy, because theoretically the idea of being chronically ill means that either you have consistently, predictably less energy in a given day, or that going about doing things that for other people take little energy take for you a lot of energy. And so it's more relevant to be able to discuss why something is a struggle for you. But yes, it's not unique to people who are suffering illness. We all have finite resources, and we can get energy back by other methods than just sleeping. And I won't go down that path unless somebody asks about it, just because, there are other things that we're talking about. And that could take the whole time, which I'm happy to do if somebody wants to talk about that. But anyway, back to it depends, is it a problem for you? It makes it so that we must be specific. It's the same reason that I use the word aim instead of goal, that a goal is a binary thing. You accomplish it or you didn't. There's not much differentiation when talking about goals between almost accomplishing it and being very far from accomplishing it. So all you need to monitor is, was the goal accomplished? Yes, no. As opposed to an aim, I'm aiming at that, but then whatever I do, I have to observe what happened and then make another attempt and see whether the next attempt is closer to or further from the aim. And I just keep going until I'm able to get there. So that failed attempts are useful as opposed to just another failed attempt, right? Yeah, it depends. It depends. Is it a problem for you? We got to be specific and granular, because the answer really is, I don't know. And neither does anybody else. Even the best, most thorough research isn't perfect. And I don't mean isn't perfect as in that the research itself is flawed, although that's true too. I mean that, let's say I'm running a study to see whether treatment X cures condition Y. And in my study, I apply it to a bunch of people, randomly controlled, all the stuff I'm supposed to do in research. It's good, solid research. And it turns out that in 90% of cases, treatment X resolves condition Y. That is an incredible number. I'm talking mostly about mental health and all that kind of stuff here. I don't know as much about medical and other fields, but in mental health, a treatment that somehow provides improvement for 90% of the people is an exorbitantly successful treatment. And still means that even within the research group, 10% of those subjects didn't get improvement. So that means that when we apply it out in the world, at best, under like controlled research conditions, there's still going to be some people for whom it doesn't work. And that's fine. Because we want to know what's going to work for 90% of people, right? Like we want to know what to start with. If you are tired, if you're consistently tired, it makes sense to look at your sleep and say, I should try to sleep 8 hours and see if that changes it. Because the research shows us that 8 hours is the aggregate that shows that like most people do best around that number. Does it mean that a given individual needs to get exactly 8 hours, not an 8 hour limit? No, it's a statistical method. And the point of it is for this, to say what's worth trying first. The problem is when it doesn't work, then people say, like we're talking about, oh, I'm doing it wrong, right? I slept 8 hours and I'm still tired. What's wrong with me? Instead of, okay, that didn't work. Now, either I can modify my sleep more, like try to get more of it or less of it, or I can look at other variables. I could sleep later. I could sleep in smaller chunks. Or other variables completely, like I could look at my diet, or I could look at what's happening in a given day, or I could look at my medication, or whatever kind of a thing that also would influence your tiredness. We get stuck because we treat these things as perfect. There's a joke I saw somebody put on Twitter, basically, that was like, me, an expert in my field, when you ask me a question about my field, well, I don't know, like we have a lot of theories and there's a lot of work, but we don't really know anything. And then me, when you ask an expert in my field, when you ask me about something from someone else's field, it's so obvious and simple. It's clearly this, that if you talk to the people who spend the most time exploring and thinking about and interacting with anything, they will tell you, we don't know. We know some things, but we can't ever know everything. And so we just know what seems to be working. And, it's only when you're on the outside and something is simple that you can say, we know what's going to happen. So the experts are doing research, and then it gets disseminated to people who are not experts, and they see the headline and they come away thinking it's simple and binary. So they walk away thinking, for example, if I'm trying to think of a real study. Oh, the marshmallow test. We've talked about that one in the past, right? The marshmallow test, very flawed and blah, blah, blah. We won't get into all those details. We did that in a stream a little while back. But the broad strokes findings, the headlines were basically people who have a better ability to delay gratification are more successful. So then everybody hears that and now starts acting as though that's true, especially when it comes to parenting. Well, I want my kid to be successful, a good and valid thing to want, right? Like you want your children to be happy. I want everyone to be happy and have what they need. Well, if I want them to be successful, then I need to I need to make them able to delay gratification, as though those two things inevitably connect one to the other, when they obviously don't. But even if that research was good, it still would not be a 100% correlation, right? So when it comes to parenting in particular, this is a problem, but this is how we come back to, is this a problem or is this too much? What people are saying is, what does the research show? Which should mean what is most likely to happen coming out of this, and definitely cannot be what will happen for me in my particular individual case. But mostly people conflate those two things. And they think that if they say, hey, my kid only sleeps 6 hours a night, is that a problem? That there should be a simple answer to say, yes, that's a problem. They should sleep 8 hours a night. But the problem with that is that some people don't sleep 8 hours a night. Some kids just don't. Some kids don't operate the best that way. And now we've given people a belief about themselves and their children in the future that is problematic, because they are now going to be invested in making something happen that can't happen. Not that people, it's hard to pick an example that covers all these things, but let's look at the chat here. I constantly question whether depression, the ADHD med isn't working, whether I just didn't notice it was working, or if whatever help I would get from it is overwhelmed by sleep deprivation, lack of exercise, and stress. But meds are supposed to make at least one of those things easier, so I blame them because that makes me feel better. Yeah, I like all of that. Especially that last part. I blame them because that makes me feel better. That's what blame is mostly used for. Obviously, there are situations in which we, think of a machine. We want to be able to identify which part broke. That's the reason. We can put the fault for the fact that the car isn't operating on the fan belt, because then we just need to replace the fan belt and it goes back to operating. But humans, we're way too complicated for that. You can't look at any one variable in isolation and say, that's the part that's broken. If I just adjust that, then everything will be working fine. All of that is, blame is great. Blame is self-absolution is what it is. It's, I'm aware of a problem, a thing that I don't like in one way or another. I want it to be different than it is. But I have assigned blame for that problem to someone else, which then means I don't have either any responsibility or really I don't have an ability to change it. It's their fault. They made it happen. So it doesn't matter what I do. And then cognitive miser, the brain, says, yep, doesn't matter what I do. So now I can stop thinking about this problem. Does it solve the problem? No. Hopefully the problem doesn't come back. Maybe the other person that you blame agrees with you and they make changes so that it doesn't come back. Maybe they just randomly do it. But it's up to chance because you stopped paying attention because it's not your fault. You're just hoping it gets better. Medication in particular is an interesting one because it is one that we target and utilize for specific purposes. And so we want to evaluate it against those specific purposes, right? If I'm taking depression medication, it's because I have an experience of being depressed that I don't like and I want that to change in some way. So I take the medication and hope that the change happens. And it might. Or something else might change. And if the other thing changes, I might notice it and I might not because I'm not looking at it sometimes. I'm only looking at this, what I'm calling depression. This other thing I don't care about, I'm not paying attention to, and it might change and I'll never notice. So just so that you know, one of my things with clients generally, I never either recommend or try to get people away from medication, partly because that's not my expertise and I'm literally like not allowed to, but also because like all this stuff, can medication help a person? Yes, obviously. We have many, many people who report that medication has helped them. Can medication fail to help somebody? Yes, obviously. We have many, many people who report that it doesn't help them. Can medication harm people? Yes, obviously. Are those things equally distributed? No. We wouldn't, if it was an equal chance of working, not working, or harming you, we wouldn't, well, again, that's medicine and not my thing, but I feel confident in saying they would not prescribe medication that has a 1 in 3 chance of helping or hurting or doing nothing. So they're more likely to be helpful and less likely to be harmful, but you are an individual. It doesn't matter if it's helpful 99% of the time when it's prescribed and harmful 1% if you're one of that 1%. So we want to evaluate the medication, not saying it's the fix or the, we want to pay attention to in the sense of an aim rather than a goal. What is it doing? Not does it accomplish its purpose, yes or no? Just what is different when I take it versus when I don't take it. And in the particular case of psychoactive medication, any medication that is intended to, or I guess not even intended to, but is known to change the way that your consciousness operates, change your conscious experience. Well, I can't really compare things through perception if theoretically my perception might be different, right? Like, here's a very common example that has nothing to do with medication. People will say, don't go to the store when you're hungry because you'll buy a lot more. Because yes, being in a state of hunger makes you crave or desire the food that's in front of you, and therefore you're more likely to buy it. And being sated means that that stuff's not as interesting to you in that moment, and therefore you're going to think more about whether you want it later. So we know that being in a different state means that you perceive the same thing, the same object at the store, as desirable or undesirable based on how you're feeling in that moment. Psychoactive medication is the same. Am I happy? Well, happiness is a perspective thing, right? That doesn't mean, by the way, that you can just choose to be happy. It means you're observing your experience and deeming it as happiness or not. But if the way that you observe, if the way that you perceive changes, it's not a reliable comparison. In other words, you might think, oh, I'm depressed before I take the medicine, and I'm equally just the exact same amount of depressed after I take the medicine, when theoretically that could be an untrue statement because something shifted in your way of perceiving things, if that makes sense. I think I'm rambling a little too much about this. Point is, if you're dealing with something psychoactive, that's the one time that I don't let people use like subjective observation. Normally, your subjective experience is great. But if we're going to say, I take ADHD medication, for example, I, Brandon, actually take ADHD medication. And then when I did that, I want to use empirical measures of how it's impacting me, as opposed to, do I feel like it's easier to focus, easier to concentrate, whatever. That is unreliable when I knowingly am doing things that is going to change my perception. So instead, I want to look at things like, for me, things like, do I start to get very sleepy in the afternoon, which I have my whole life, but don't when I take medication? When I complete one task, how long does it take me? I should say, sleepy is also subjective. I should clarify. I don't mean, do I feel sleepy internally? I mean, like, do my eyes drift closed? And do I start yawning a lot in the afternoon? When I finish one task, how long is it before I select and move on to the next task? And these are not across the board things. These are specific problems I was experiencing that prompted me to look into medication in the first place. So I'm evaluating whether the medication is helping with the specific things that I am looking for it to help with. Whether it also helps with other things in good ways, bad ways, side effects, whatever, that also matters. But as far as whether it's efficacious, whether it's working the way I want it to, I need to have some empirical way to measure that. Or at least I want to have some empirical way to measure that. Anyway, so is it a problem? It's too much. I can't say that about an individual. Nobody can. The fact that you're asking it means that there's something about it that's worrying you. And we can broadly divide that into two categories of things. Either there is something that you are actually experiencing that is different than what you want it to be, and you're wondering whether the question you're asking, is this a problem? You're wondering whether that might be impacting the thing that you're experiencing that you don't like. Or there is no problem that you're experiencing that you're connecting to the thing, but you have heard from some source, some credible, some source that you find credible, that even though it's not a problem now, it could cause a problem later on down the line. In either case, we can't say definitively yes or no, but it's about helping a person to distinguish which of those two things they're asking about. Is it that there's an actual thing happening and you're wondering if this thing impacts it? Because we're going to address that one way. Or is it that you don't have a problem, but other people are telling you that you should be worried that it will be a problem later, and we'll address that a different way. It's not a bad idea. It's hard to decide what you think it'll help with, though. And even if you do, remembering to keep track of it and figuring out exactly how to measure sounds like a third little spell slot that I don't have. Yeah, well, theoretically, this is what whoever prescribes you the medication is supposed to be doing with you, is helping you to identify. All right. Diagnosis is a middle step, meaning symptoms, problematic behavior, problematic experiences, which, very important to know, can be problematic either for the person experiencing the symptom or problematic for people around the person experiencing the symptom. Either way, we call it a symptom diagnostically. And then we group those symptoms together when we see certain patterns of symptom presentation, meaning, depression, for example, anhedonia, loss of interest in things that used to bring you joy, sleeping excessively or not at all, or very little, feeling a sense of sadness. I believe the exact wording in the DSM is a significant feeling of sadness taking up most or all of the day. I want to say 3 days or more per week for a period of 6 months or more to be major depressive disorder. So we see a symptom, and then we see enough times where that symptom happens with a person in conjunction with these other symptoms that it's useful for us to group those together as a diagnosis, so that then we can test treatments for that condition as a diagnosis, as a condition, as opposed to testing against all these individual symptomatic expressions. I'm being so like verbose and using big words, I guess. Meaning the diagnosis, when we're talking about mental health stuff, right? The diagnosis itself is a construct, is a useful and valid thing. It is not something that has anything to do with disease. Disease has a mechanism that we can observe. We can see a virus go into a cell and watch what it does. But mental health is all about behavior and self-report. The only way you know I'm sad is if I tell you that I'm sad, right? You can observe what I do and come up with a theory that I'm doing it because I am sad, but you can't definitively and empirically point at something that proves that, right? So what should happen theoretically with your prescriber is that they ask you about specific problems. What is happening or not happening that is difficult for you? Then they put together a diagnosis and a treatment, and they recommend it, and they tell you how it's supposed to theoretically impact you or why they're prescribing it for you. And then you come back to them and you talk to them and they check in on how are things changing. That's how it's supposed to happen. And a lot of people do it that way. But these days, a lot of people skip straight to the diagnosis. It's just, I'm depressed, I have ADHD, I have OCD, I have bipolar personality, whatever. And we skip looking at all the specific symptoms that led us to believe that that's it. Because a lot of the time, people these days are looking at these as the reasons that something's happening. I am doing this thing because I am depressed. And while that's not untrue necessarily, it could be true. That's just not what a diagnosis is supposed to be, right? It's not. It can be helpful for a person in understanding what the pattern of their behavior is or why they're feeling the way they're feeling in order to make changes, right? If it's because of X, then I'm going to try this and see if that changes it. It doesn't mean that there's something we can look at that says definitively you're only experiencing this because you have X condition. So if we deal with X condition, then this symptom just disappears. It might disappear if we treat it in ways that we commonly treat X condition. It's just that that condition isn't a real thing. I'm getting so off track. Here's the specific context in which is, how do you know when too much is too much came up for me this week is in making summer plans for our kids specifically. I live in Northbrook, Illinois, which is a wonderful town. The North Shore of Illinois has a very particular culture, as every place does, and it is very much one element of it that I don't like so much is a keeping up with the Joneses kind of a thing. That there are people who will be genuinely upset that their elementary school test results, our elementary school tests at the 96th percentile, but the elementary school 2 blocks away tests at the 98th percentile. And then they want to go and talk to the school and say, what are you guys doing wrong? Why? Blah, blah, blah. It's a very competitive thing. Which, whatever, separate thing. But part of what that manifests in is children who are booked to hell and back. They got 2 different sports that they do, each with 1 to 3 practices and a game every week. They've got music lessons, they've got swimming lessons, they've got after school tutoring, they've got summer school. Even when I grew up, and probably when a lot of us grew up, summer school was you failed a class, here's an opportunity to make it up over the summer. But a lot of summer school is now, here's an additional thing you can do so that you'll be even better situated to compete with your classmates later who didn't do the thing. We're putting more and more and more and more as time goes on children's plate. And so the question, how much is too much? How much free time do they need? How much should we be pushing them to take piano lessons even if they don't want to, or tennis lessons even if they don't want to, or whatever? There is no answer to that question generally. Some kids, some families, great idea, and they love it and it works and they're happy that they did it. Some kids, some families, terrible idea and it's miserable and they hate it and they regret it. But that causes problems when how you're trying to approach things is through that competitive framework. Like, I need to know, is my kid going to be better at blank than another kid? Yeah. Then you all of a sudden it's FOMO, it's keeping up with the Joneses. It's, well, I better put him in everything because I never know when good enough is going to be good enough. So you do this stuff observationally. You do a little bit at a time and you pay close attention and you check in. Oh, interesting. I'll come back to that in a second, that chat comment. You find a lesson that you think might be interesting for your kid, talk to them about it. If they're interested in it, you sign them up. If they're not interested in it, but you think it's important that they try it anyway, because I can agree with that, right? I can get behind how would they know if they like it or not before they try it, so let's try it. Sure, but just know that every time you get somebody to do something that they don't want to do, they don't like it. That's what it means to not want to do a thing, right? And every time you make somebody do something that they don't like you so much anymore, right? It decreases that. It doesn't eliminate it completely. So be judicious about how you use it. But you have to be ready for the wall. You have to be ready for the time that comes, that will eventually come for everybody, of this is too much. I can't add on more. If you're not watching for that, and if you're not open to the fact that it will happen and that when it does happen, you need to respond, then you might miss it, or you might see it but keep pushing anyway. And that's when people get hurt. And I don't just mean injured, although yes, that is how people get physically injured. I mean that when you're doing something that's unsustainable, it feels uncomfortable, it feels unenjoyable, it will start to feel painful at some point if you continue. All of those are signals that it's unsustainable and that you should course correct. But if we ignore that stuff and just keep going, it's not going anyplace good. So what does this mean about booking your kids' time? It means put the most important stuff first. If you are really dead set on, no, it is very important to me that they learn to play an instrument or they learn a different language, cool. Let's put that one on as the first thing that we try and see how it goes. And then the next thing that we add is going to be some. Don't start with something that's pretty insignificant just because it's, like, I don't give a crap about volleyball, but it's volleyball time, so we're going to sign them up for volleyball. And then later on, I do really care about basketball for some reason, but now they're not going to do that because they're overbooked, right? Start with the things that are most important, which requires that you actually have to do some work thinking about what's most important to you. That's a good thing to have to do, to question whether this is something that's worth doing, right? As opposed to whether it's something you should do or are supposed to do. And then when the time comes that somebody wants to quit a thing, you let them quit. You entered into this knowing that at some point it was going to be too much. If you're not comfortable with that idea that at some point it will be too much, then you shouldn't be doing it. You got to know it's going to be too much, and I got to be ready to listen. And whether I like it or not, I got to be ready to adapt. And yes, it's different for different people, different variables. Sometimes it's not about keeping up with the Joneses. Sometimes it's about both of us got to work and the kid can't be home alone all day and we got to find a program to put him in. Yeah, that makes sense. Sometimes it's about the kid themselves is the one that's pushing for, I want to do more and more and more and more. Cool, great, that makes sense. There's no way to say that you should do 2 activities and no more. And I don't think anybody has any problem with anything I'm saying here because of the examples I'm using. Well, some people definitely will have a problem. There are very many people that will say things like, no pain, no gain, right? That, no, you shouldn't respond in that way. When somebody doesn't want to do something, you force them to do it anyway. Quitting is bad. That's a whole problematic thing in and of itself. There's utility in that, but not in what it's been evolved to become. But here's the part where people do start to worry. Ooh, yes. Here's the part where people do start to worry is when they think that something is too enjoyable, particularly digital technology, video games, screen time, whatever you want to call it. The kids like it too much. They're doing too much of it. I think this must be bad, right? That's too much. And even if it's not necessarily causing a problem in the moment, it's hard to ignore all the talk that you're hearing from everybody else saying, no, this is bad. Although in actuality, the research doesn't back that up, just so that everybody knows. In fact, evidence suggests that playing video games is very beneficial for a kid because they want to do it. This shouldn't be that complicated. We make mistakes all the time. We think that something that's good for us, we do things that we want to do that later on causes problems. But the fact that we want to do it is evidence. It's not proof, but it suggests that there's something valuable in it for us. Otherwise, why would our brains and bodies be wired in such a way as to enjoy it? Why would we be incentivized to engage with it so much if there was nothing of value in it? It's not perfect, but enjoyment is a tick in the pro column. And often, especially with kids, we count it as a tick in the con column. If they like it too much, it's got to be bad. And in particular, then we start looking at every problematic thing that's happening and overemphasizing the role of the thing we've already identified as problematic, right? That the next day when they don't want to get up in the morning, I'm going to be like, because those video games, because I was looking for a reason for them to be problematic. Okay, balance. What's the balance between booking yourself to create structure when you struggle with motivation and stressing yourself out with the structure? What if I need structure to function, but the structure stresses me out because all I want to do is sleep? Any tips for keeping track of your obligations to help see when you're overbooked if you're not good at determining that yourself? And then there was a comment earlier. It's really nice to hear you talk about this. It feels like it actually makes more sense that I spend so much time worrying about how I can't measure results subjectively. Oh, with your medication. Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense. And yeah, get somebody's help, whoever you can, but your prescriber should be helping with that to observe things, if nobody else anyway. So structure, and yes, when it comes to summer and kids especially, we want some structure. Here's how you navigate the balance. This many years ago, I had a client ask me, they used a metaphor basically for something that they were experiencing, and they said more or less that it's like, it's like I'm in a lifeboat and somebody else is drowning in the water and I'm trying to reach over and help them get them into the boat. But if I reach too far, I'm just going to fall in with them. How do I know how far I can reach? And the answer to that question is you can't know in advance. What are you supposed to do? Calculations that take into account the exact specific temperature and humidity and where each wave is located and the structure of the boat and whatever. And no, you can't do that. What you can do is move slowly and safely and reach. And only if you feel safe do you reach a little bit more. And only if you feel safe do you reach a little bit more. And sooner or later, you're going to reach a point where something wobbles or something happens and you might not even know what it is, but you're going to say, I can't reach farther. This is scary. And you back up. And sometimes that's right. And sometimes that's wrong. So you can try again and get to that point again and see, do you feel more comfortable with it this time? Is it working better this time? Okay, yes, I can keep going. Whoa, oh, no. Okay, let me try that again. Keep going. No, same point, don't feel safe again. Same point, don't feel safe again. That's how you know it's too far. You can't predict these things, right? You can make guesses about whether they're more or less likely, but you don't actually know whether they will happen or not. So you have to pay attention. And this structure question, the balance of structure, the value of structure is that it means that there are now things that I don't have to spend resources on. If I eat the same thing for breakfast at the same time every day, because that's the structure and routine that I have set, I no longer have to spend resources checking in with whether I'm hungry or thinking about what I want to eat that morning or trying to come up with something that sounds tasty to me, because that's what I'm looking for. I don't have to spend resources either way. And some people are going to say that's ridiculous. I want to be able to enjoy my breakfast and cook a nice omelet and change things up. Cool. So that means you want to spend resources on those things, and that's great. But then there's something else that you're automating, that you're making structure or routine or for whatever reason is just not on your radar that I'm paying attention to that you're not. It's not more or less, it's just different. So structure, when you structure a thing, it means it takes the stress of having to think about it off. Even in this particular case, you need, when you're saying I need structure, where did it go? I need structure to function, but structure stresses me out. If I need structure to function, well, what that means is deciding, monitoring moment to moment, thinking about what should I do right now and when should I do it and how long and whatever. I don't want to think about all that. So I'm going to think about it once or a few times, plan it all out so that day to day I don't think about it again. When it comes to this time, I just do this thing. I don't have to think about whether I want to or whatever. If structure is stressing you out, it's not serving its function for you. There are many, many things that we have to structure, and it's going to stress me out anyway, but I can't change it because it involves other people, right? Like the school time starts at 8:25 or whatever it is, right? And even if I don't personally like that, I can't just change the school start time because other people are involved. But you're talking about, structure that you're putting in place for yourself to help yourself. If it stresses you out, it's not helping you. And that's how you know the balance. If you put some structure into place and it doesn't cause you a problem, which kind of a separate thing, I guess, but just so that you know, we only prove negatives. We can't prove that something is helping us. We can just prove that it's not causing us a problem, right? Yet. Which sounds really pessimistic. And it's not. It's just how we observe what happens, right? Like I can theorize that if I snap my fingers every time I walk into a room, that my house won't catch on fire. And then I can snap my fingers every time I walk into a room and my house doesn't catch on fire. That doesn't prove that doing that ended up in this. But if I snap my fingers and somehow I throw a spark off them that catches something on fire, now I have some pretty solid proof that this caused a problem, right? Or if I walk in and people are saying, that's so annoying, why do you do that every time you walk into a room? That's causing me a problem. So if you put some structure in place and it doesn't bother you or cause you a problem, then at worst, it's not causing you a problem. At best, it is helping you, perhaps even better than you thought that it would. If you put structure in place and it's causing you problems, it's not good structure. That doesn't mean that there's nothing within that every element of that is bad. It might be about finding what is the thing I was trying to accomplish in here, or why did I think this would work? Can I keep that element of it and change other things around it? But yes, stress, distress, sadness, negative emotions of any kind, those are our feedback systems telling us this isn't going in the way that I want it to go. Right? That's what it is. That's what stress is. Stress does not motivate you. It doesn't. Having a deadline be close, that might quote unquote motivate you. It's not really about motivating, but stress is a physiological thing. The experience of stress is something that is happening in your brain and body, and we can watch it both in research, but also in your own personal anecdotal lived experience. Do you function better when you are under great stress? No. This particular thing is problematic, especially for people who identify as ADHD, but it's certainly not limited to that. It's problems for lots of people because we mix up two things, which I call urgency and stress. People think that the stress gets them going because they're looking at the goal, the binary. Am I doing the work I'm supposed to be doing or am I not? And I notice that at the last minute, I am doing the work that I'm supposed to be doing. And also at the last minute, I'm really stressed, and that stress has been building for a long time. So I correlate those two and say, oh, the reason that I'm working at the last minute is because of the stress. But here's an alternative suggestion, alternative theory, reason, right? Perhaps you have been doing calculations on how much of your resources are going to be required in order to do the thing, particularly time, if we're talking about a deadline, how much time you need in order to do the thing. And once you have determined, I think it's going to take me about a day to do, then when it's a day before it's due, you start doing it. Maybe you're stressed. Maybe you're not stressed and you'd still do it anyway. Maybe it's not that you need to punish yourself with stress in order to get yourself to do something. Maybe it's just that you were going to do it at the last minute, one way or the other, because that's when your brain determined it would be the best time to do. And that actually the problem is that you're trying to force yourself to do it earlier than you should. And that's why you're getting stressed. Stress has no beneficial effects, just like pain has no beneficial effects. We can go through stressful and painful things. We can experience suffering and come out the other side with things that we like. You know, I grew, I changed, I got stronger. That's great, because if you're going to experience pain or stress or suffering, let's hope we can get something out of it that we like. And it can be useful to look back and say that. But was the pain itself necessary for it? No. The pain was a signal to you. The stress was a signal to you that things were bad. And in response to that signal, you understood that things were bad and then evaluated what to do differently. So it might have been necessary to call your attention to the problem. That's what pain and discomfort and stress is. It's calling attention to the problem. It doesn't actually help you solve the problem. Sometimes it's that you don't have the resources to care about a project and you can only care when the repercussions get present enough. Yeah, but that's urgency, right? In other words, what's different between that and saying, well, I don't care about that right now because I have plenty of time. Now I care about it because I don't have plenty of time. The truth is that some things are actually best to do last minute. It is not always good to do things early. In particular, if it's a thing that you don't want to do in and of itself, that in and of itself, the experience is not enjoyable, but it is important to you because it contributes to something else. You're learning something, or you earn a grade, or you develop a relationship or make somebody happy and they'll owe you something or whatever. Generally speaking, it's best to do those things at the last minute. Anybody here ever forced themselves to do something well ahead of the deadline, and then between the time they completed it and the time that the deadline arrived, something changes that meant you didn't actually have to do it? And you're like, if I had just waited. Hell, we see this in like the public debate about student loan forgiveness, right? Student debt forgiveness, where people are basically saying like, well, I paid it off, and now if you forgive it for everybody else, that's ridiculous. I should have never paid it off, I guess, right? Which there are material differences there. I do support student debt forgiveness for sure, but there's actual like reason to want to do that earlier because there's compounding interest and blah, blah, blah. But absent an actual reason to do it early, the vast majority of stuff that people are stressing out about, I'm not doing it early enough, I'm procrastinating it, I'm leaving it to the last minute, the vast majority of that stuff is because you think you're supposed to do it early, but you don't actually know what the reason behind it is. And sometimes there's a reason and you just don't know it. Still important to find that reason, because then it will be a lot easier to get yourself to do it earlier. Sometimes there's not actually a good reason for it. I will say one reason that always matters is you have to have some confidence in your ability to accurately predict what it will cost you to accomplish the thing. If you think it's going to take a day, but it actually ends up taking 4, then yeah, you don't want to wait until the last day because you're going to be 3 days late now. And every time you have an experience like that, you're going to start thinking more and more, I better start earlier and earlier because I don't know how long things take me. But that's not like a character trait. I'm bad at predicting how long things take me. I'm really good at predicting how long some things take and really bad at predicting how long other things take. So it's about learning that specific task more and what it takes you. You want to care, but that doesn't magically provide the motivation you need. Talking as if I've ever gotten something done before the deadline. Honestly, well, I don't know many people that get certain types of things done before the deadline. I usually want to get it done early to get it off my overloaded to-do list because it's sitting there also stressing me out. And that's the key. Because you have it on your to-do list, you're acting as though, you're believing as though you must do it as soon as possible. I, in college, wrote almost all my papers pretty much the day before they were due. I would oftentimes actually go to the library at 8 or 9 p.m. the night before it was due in a class at 8 a.m. and just work overnight. Because no matter how much I tried to get myself to work early, it never worked. So at a certain point, I just started planning around that. And you know what? I got it done. When I was stressed and feeling like I was doing it wrong, because I was doing it at the last minute, I got it done. When I stopped stressing and just planned on doing it at the last minute, I got it done. The stress didn't help me. Stress can be part of a fight or flight response, right? Which means that it can dump adrenaline into your system and give you more energy. It can be beneficial in that way. And it can be beneficial in the way that pain is beneficial. It draws you with anything that requires any cognitive solutions. Stress can help you keep walking for another mile when you would otherwise collapse because you're having a biological response. It doesn't help you think about or understand or know anything any differently. In fact, it's the opposite. It is pulling resources from cognition. It's prefrontal cortex shutdown. It makes you less able to think because it's making you more able to do. So stress can help you get things done if you already know exactly how to do it. But if you already know exactly how to do it, you probably aren't stressing about the fact that it's getting close to the end because you know exactly how to do it and you know exactly how long it takes. In other words, you feel like you're doing something wrong by having a long to-do list. That's the thing that's stressing you out, not the actuality of the thing not being done. And of course, there are specifics, right? There are things that, yes, you should do early. Generally speaking, the more you want to iterate, meaning the more important it is to you to get something to be as perfect, as good as you can make it, the earlier you want to start. The more you have very clearly defined criteria and the more you know how to navigate and meet those minimum requirements of the criteria, the later you want to start because the more information you have. If I'm supposed to write a paper, well, 6 weeks from now, I'm going to have 6 weeks worth of information that I don't currently have. What if I write a paper now and then 6 weeks from now I learn something new, right? Doesn't mean put it off till the last minute and don't ever worry about anything ever. It just means focus your resources on being accurate about what do I need to do and what resources will it take from me, and therefore, when should I start it? Not, I should start earlier, which, by the way, is an unsolvable problem. I should start earlier? Okay, I do. Well, I should start even earlier. Okay, I do. There's never, this is early enough. You could always start earlier, except for you can't start before you know it's something that you should do. Don't want to care about it anymore. Working on having a place to put it so I don't have to care until I get there, but that takes executive functioning. So that's the thing. That's what a to-do list is supposed to be. What it's meant to do is offload the responsibility of holding on to information so that you don't have to spend working memory on it. It's instead at this place. And now I don't have to think about it because I know I will see it there later. And yes, what is necessary in order for that to work is consistency, routine, structure, like you were saying earlier, right? I don't know what clients I'm going to see in a given day until the morning of I look at my calendar, my Google Calendar, and see who I'm supposed to meet with that day. I legitimately don't retain that information because I've been using my Google Calendar that way for, 5 years, 6 years. I know that everything will be there, so my brain doesn't waste any of its resources. If I start a new system that I've never used before, my brain is still going to hold on to that information anyway. I have no reason to believe that if I forget it, I'll remember it because of the new system. Anyway, we're past the hour. So generally, the structure, the balance, how you do that, it's navigating. It's saying how much is too much video games or how much is too much booking, responsibilities or structure in my life or whatever. It's like saying how much is too much food. I don't know. Depends. It depends on when you last ate. It depends on what kind of food you're eating. It depends on who you are and what your body is like and what you respond to and whether you have allergies and blah, blah, blah. We can do research and say, 2,000 calories a day through that statistical work, aggregation, analysis. I can't say to you should eat exactly 2,000 calories a day. What I can say is, if you want to eat, eat. When you don't want to eat, don't eat. If you start to have any problems that you think might be related to that, then we explore those things. I think the way I'm eating is affecting me and it's making me too tired. Okay, well then let's look at that and make an adjustment and see if we can figure out whether that's worth trying, right? I can't say everybody should eat a burrito. Some people just ate 3 burritos and don't have room for another burrito. Some people are allergic to burritos. Some people love burritos. And what is a burrito? No, I'm just getting off on things. No, we got to wrap up. It's good to be with you. Thank you guys for being in chat and being active today, particularly Bast Insider. I appreciate it. It's mostly been you, and I do appreciate that. Thank you for being here. Just pay attention. Your life is not something that you can set and forget. There are things that you can automate, things that are worth automating, and there are other things that you can't. And what you can automate and what I can automate are different. We'll be back next week, Wednesday, 1 p.m. to 2 p.m. Central Time. Thank you all, and goodbye.